First, I'm Martha Hare. I am the program committee chair for WAPA. And in case people, I'm going to say this at the end, but I'll say it also at the beginning. We are always looking for people who can present at our meetings, whether solo or part of a panel. So if you have something that you would like to share with the membership, I'm going to put my contact info in the chat, and please let me know, and you can either do a one-off or even better, join our committee. And it could be you or it could be somebody you know about. So while I put that information in the chat, I am going to ask our Suzanne, are you outgoing president or immediate past president? Well, whatever you are, you're muted. So Susanna is going to do the presidential piece of this.
I'm outgoing. I just want to welcome everybody. It's good to see. It's a lot of friendly faces, some that I haven't seen in a while. Hello, Judith. It's good to see you. And this is my last meeting as a president. When we have our next meeting next month, I will be the gone president. You will have a new president, Mark Edberg. He's going to be great. He is great. And we can tell you more about him later. I think we should send out an announcement to make it official. But anyway, I'm glad to see everybody, and it's been a busy 3 years or however long it's been. And thanks for everybody's help and everybody's support. And I can't say that I'm terribly sorry to be leaving. And I'm not really leaving. I'll be around, and I'm going to definitely be around to help Mark. So you guys know where to find me if you need me or just want to talk. So with that being said, welcome, and I'll turn it back to, I guess, to you, Martha?
Yeah, so then I will turn it over to our presenters. So I want to thank Dr. Neil Tashima and Kathleen Crane, the founding and managing partners of LTG Associates, for joining us again. They are long-term WAPistas, and it's always a pleasure to have them. So to tell you a little bit more, one thing, for some reason, I don't know how to turn off the doorbell. If one of the people who I've made co-host knows how to turn off the doorbell, I think that would be nice, because it is a little distracting. Okay, so Dr. Neil Tashima. Neil, I never knew your official first name is Nathaniel, and now I know why you spell it Niel. He, as I said, he's one of the two founding and managing partners of LTG Associates. I guess it's a third, a large cat. The oldest anthropologically based consulting firm in North America. So I guess the cat couldn't have been one of the founding members because they've been around for 40 years. And he has led projects that have helped shape policy and services that affect the health and welfare of minority and at-risk communities. Clients have ranged from community-based organizations and foundations, local, state, federal, and agencies. And in addition to being an active social scientist, Neil is responsible for oversight and of the firm. So that's important because they're a model for anthropological consulting. Neil is also a past president of NAPA, National Association for the Practice of Anthropology. He has been on the AAA Executive Board. He is a current member of the board of the Society for Applied Anthropology, and of course, a long-standing member of WAPA. And he chairs the NAPA mentor program and co-chairs the NAPA committee responsible for the annual Careers Expo. Kathleen Crane is also a managing partner of LTG, and her title includes Senior Professional Anthropologist. She's also had over 40 years of experience in health and human services research, program development, evaluation, policy analysis, and technical assistance. And Kathleen has been engaged in scores of projects for international, federal, state, and local governmental organizations, and with for and nonprofit organizations and foundations. And she also works on development as part of LTG. Kathleen spoke to us in her role as president of NAPA. She's now the immediate past president. She has also served on the SFAA Nominations and Elections Committee. She's chaired the NAPA committee responsible for the Careers Expo. She's a founder of the NAPA Mentor Former, and of course, a long-standing member of WAPA. And their organization has been recognized with Praxis Awards 6 times over their decades of work. So they are really icons in the world of applied anthropology, and it's kind of like, what's a year without them talking to us? It's really important. Here they're going to highlight a project that they had with NASA, and I'm not going to try and introduce that. I will just mess it up. So I'm going to hand it over to the two of you. I do want to say that you are welcome to put questions in the chat, and then we will, at a time when Kathleen and Neil feel it's appropriate, open for questions from the floor. Okay, take it away.
Thank you, Martha. We are always delighted to be at WAPA, and this is kind of our Star Wars, entry to the project. First, I want to recognize that there are 2 more members of the team that did this project here tonight, Elizabeth Bryady and Peter Van Arsdale. And I can no longer see everybody, so raise your hand or and
yeah, if you use the raise hand function, you'll come to the top of the gallery.
Okay. And as Martha said, please go ahead and put questions or issues into the chat, and we will pick them up at the end. I'm going to put a hot link for the paper that was the genesis of this title into the chat, and at the end, I can't do it without losing my full screen. I won't do that at the moment, but it's a good synopsis of the project. So with that, notice please that our NASA PI is also included here, and you will hear about her a couple of times in our presentation. So thank you.
So, thank you all for joining us. It's a pleasure to be here, always with WAPA and our friends. The challenge in science and engineering is how you compete in this era of tremendously exciting IT and computer world of Google. And this was something Jaewon Shin, the former NASA ARMD director, said back in 2015. And this project ran a while back. And some of the things we're going to be talking about were ideas back then. And you will be surprised at how much of that is around the world you actually live and work in today. Jaewon had a strong vision of the needing to develop skills and resources to work in a very different universe, something that in 2016 didn't exist, 2015 didn't exist.
So this evening, what we'd like to do is to tell 3 stories. mostly simultaneously and interwoven, sometimes in stereo. The first is the NASA ARMD, and we're going to use a lot of acronyms, but we will define them. The context in NASA. The second is what NASA did and what it meant. And finally, the story of conducting a mind-altering ethnographic project. We are going to mostly focus on NASA and the team that we studied, because we think that that's the most interesting story. And we will work hard at weaving this so it is an interesting story as we go forward.
So the call for the proposal was the organizational ethnographer for Convergent Aeronautics Solutions, CAS, directed team design. And this is where we start language and culture for all of us anthropologists. We're learning the culture and language of NASA ARMD required a lot of us to bend our minds in all kinds of directions. And you will hear acronyms, you will hear concepts that were either part of NASA's ARMD language or something that was developed during the course of this project by NASA ARMD. The scope of work seemed reasonable when we took it on. Ethnography was clearly understood by the author. And the timeline was aggressive, but was clear. We proposed and won the contract. And then the fun really began. We proposed that ethnography would be the central part of this, and that we would bring a team of very senior folks to the field. And this was an interesting, challenging, stimulating, complex, exasperating, and ultimately fun project, at least for most of us. The ethnographic team is a fascinating group of folks. As we get there. And one of the things about this is that having been at this, Kathleen and I having been at this for a very long time, we have really great networks, and we call on people every so often to see if they'd like to work with us on projects. You can see all of this stuff here. What's important is that our senior analyst, Elizabeth Bayeti, who's in the audience, and one of our senior field ethnographers, Peter Van Arsdale, who's also in the audience, are past presidents of NAPA. Kathleen is past president just last month, and so am I. Ken Erickson and Don Lehman have both been on the governing council for NAPA. And all of these folks have been folks that we have trusted in their anthropology practice for years. And when we called each of them to come and join us, the answer was, "Are you crazy? How would I say no to something like this?" Our data analysts and our literature review folks are a little more junior, but they've brought great anthropological insight to this endeavor. And we have been very pleased with all of these folks to have been working with them, but also to know them into the present context.
So a little bit of culture as context. ARMD is the Aeronautics Research Mission Directorate, which is one of the 4 NASA centers. They have 4 geographically distant centers where research is primarily conducted. The methods are grounded in engineering rigor, and requirements guide the work that the engineers do. It is engineer-centered and driven, and with a major focus on engineering specializations, such as nozzles, wing edges, all kinds of wondrous pieces of material and equipment that drive aeronautics. And this is the creme de la creme. There is no lack of pride in NASA, nor should there be. It is a hierarchical organization, often principal investigator centered and driven, and teams are often multidisciplinary but not integrated. And we're going to talk about that later on, because you're going to hear a lot about teaming tonight and what teaming means. It's an innovative organization. You would be surprised if I said otherwise. And innovation generating from the field. NASA is a major funder of innovation from large aeronautics firms and from universities. Globally high profile, of course, and reasonably and expectedly risk averse. You cannot send a rocket into the air spewing taxpayer dollars and expect people to be happy with you, nor can you risk lives. And that's a very important kind of ground issue for NASA, is to protect life. A nice picture for you.
So our charge as ethnographers was, what are the key challenges, implications, and opportunities in NASA's new approach to the type of teaming observed? And you need to remember, NASA never tried something like this before. Going back to the previous slide, risk averse, that is a core cultural element for NASA. It is a belief firmly held from the very newest hire to the most senior person in the organization back in 2016. What are the key areas of difficulty in NASA application? And what are the areas of most promise for NASA application? We hit the ground running. We were already a while behind the actual team, and we had to make up ground pretty quickly. So all of the folks engaged on the ethnography side of this had to learn language, had to learn methods that we were going to use consistently across the team, and had to learn what it was we were actually trying to accomplish.
So, these were the key questions for the experiment. It's important to note that most ARMD projects reported to take anywhere from 18 months to decades to complete. This team had 6 months to complete their assignment and then time to report out to headquarters. Innovation is a repeated word here and will become an important element in the story of the AATC team and the results of the project. AATC, you will hear us say it again and again. It is the Aeronautics Autonomy Testbed Capability. The team named itself when they began this project. And I will not define it again because it's a mouthful. Because this was a radical experiment, cultural resistance may have been sharpened and less subtle than it may have been in a less difficult, less countercultural project. We were able to fairly quickly pinpoint individual and organizational issues for study. Some we had anticipated coming in, but we rapidly began to see where the fault lines were. So the questions for the team were, can we rapidly learn and apply new approaches? Can we create innovative conceptual designs? Our questions were, what militates for and against rapid innovation? What are the potential costs and dangers? There were a number of immediate challenges to the AATC startup. Some of the conditions under which we began to work on this project, which was very important to NASA ARMD. The job was rapid, 6 months, autonomy design, not a well-defined area, using new tools, so a fast learning curve without requirements, using an unusual teaming form, interdisciplinary with non-traditional roles, unusual leadership mode, adaptive with non-traditional roles. It was more than NASA hard. NASA talks about things being NASA hard. It was NASA countercultural. This was an extreme test bed for testing the ability of these engineers working within ARMD cultures to take up new skills and work in new ways at hyperspeed. Our job was to chronicle their journey and to bring back lessons. This is the story of the AATC team as recorded by a very large senior group of ethnographers. As social scientists, we will be particularly thoughtful about our use of language and images in a culture grounded in engineering. So when we make categorical statements like NASA engineers are smart and competitive, understand that these statements are grounded in our research, and if you have differing opinions, we'll chat at the Q&A. Everything we talk about, unless we tell you that it was a wild supposition, is grounded in the literature, documents reviewed, interviews conducted, and our observations made. Our challenge at the outset was to understand enough of the organizational structure to identify and network to the people we needed to contact, create relationships, and gather useful information quickly. The final challenge for us was that anthropologists within an engineering context were rumored to have two heads at a minimum.
Ethnography was a word that NASA had to learn as we worked with them. They weren't quite sure what this really meant or how it was going to help them do anything in particular. So the experiment for them was, can we rapidly form teams and rapidly innovate and solve open-ended challenges? Now, this sounds kind of straightforward and kind of matter of fact. But we're going to begin by discussing a purposely designed extreme experiment. It brought together a group of highly skilled NASA engineers under the Convergent Aeronautics Systems, which was a new program intended to incubate innovation within ARMD. And we were the external observers charged with understanding the process and results. And we'll talk about that in a bit. The engineers we were watching, we were observing and interviewing, are all those guys, and they were all guys, that we all went to undergraduate school with who were in engineering, chemistry, physics, all of those quote-unquote hard sciences. And it was great fun watching them struggle with qualitative research. When we say it was difficult, we're talking about an experiment in which multiple variables were changed at once for this team. The purpose was to expose the challenges in conducting highly innovative work. You can hypothesize and philosophize all day, but you need to run experiments. And this was ground-shifting experiments for all of the team members as well as us.
So, welcome to the team. This was a highly skilled group of NASA engineers drawn from 3 of the 4 research centers. The PI, see the red circle, was the only woman, organizational expert. She has a PhD in organizational science as well as a master's in engineering. And she is a whole wonder. And we would love to go on about her. She became central to helping the team move through the experiment. They worked together on complex technical questions intended to surface answers to a series of core experimental questions. In the process, they tested the tolerance of teams under a variety of extreme conditions, and everyone forgot it was an experiment. It became not just an experiment, but real and consequential to everyone involved as they played out the existing culture reacting to a profoundly countercultural experiment. It's important to remember that there's a growing literature on this. There's science to designing and managing this kind of innovation, and we'll talk a bit about that later on. So, and you see the boards that they're working on? This is design thinking. This is, if you see puzzled looks on their faces, if you see them working very hard, it's because this was new technology to them. Post-its are not what NASA engineers normally use for developing concepts.
This slide is about me wanting to show this really cool airplane. We were reporting out at the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics at their annual meetings in 2018, I think. This plane design got designation from the U.S. Air Force to begin working it out. And it is a supersonic transport. We will come back to some of these ideas, some of these products towards the end of this, so that you start thinking about where the world was again in 2016 and the kinds of things we take for granted around us now that have become part of this innovative process. And this project helps those concepts become real. So now we want to talk about studying the AATC experiment. Senior design, organizational functioning, and engineering experienced team of social scientists. That was us. But the NASA team, other than PI, was not experienced with ethnography or anthropologists. Talk about being strange people in a very strange landscape. This required us to be continuously ready to explain and educate in order to move the ideas forward. It also required continuous engagement to set and maintain the seriousness and importance of the research that we were conducting. NASA teams had no way of evaluating what we were doing or what we might bring back. They had no perspective on how this would help them. They were so enmeshed in the doing of this and trying to understand what they were trying to accomplish with no direction from outside. And their team leader, the PI, was a coach, but not a doer.
So a few concepts as we go forward. Some of these will be quite well known to you. Design innovation is an important idea. It's to discover the parameters of the need and problem and then determine what requirements are, working from the problem to the need to potential solution, using tools and methods such as design thinking. Most of you will know design thinking, rapid development, multiple iterations, disposable ideas, inexpensive prototyping, and testing. Most frequent users are UX, Google, IDEO, Microsoft, and so forth. We borrowed a graphic that illustrates the phases of design thinking. And this is the design tool that the AATC team used to understand autonomy needs for new clients and stakeholders. This was not about rockets. This was about autonomous vehicles on the ground. And we'll talk a little bit about new stakeholders like farmers, like United Parcel Service. This was a whole new area for ARMD engineers. These are different animals and the constructed methods that are reported to be used in traditional engineering. These are some fairly straightforward traditional engineering. There is a way that you do engineering. There's a book, and you follow the book, and you follow the steps, and you can innovate, but we'll talk about innovation in a little while. Rapid innovation priority projects. These are a new animal. We call them RIP projects. Teams, a group of individuals engaged in a collaborative effort to pursue an agreed upon purpose. Interdisciplinary, I think we all know interdisciplinary. Multidisciplinary in ARMD terms are teams of professionals trained in different engineering disciplines who coordinate their contributions to improve a product or process. They coordinate, doesn't talk about teaming. So RIP is rapid innovation, different kinds of assignments that might be made. And we chose to bring all three of these assignments together because they share a number of characteristics that we felt distinguish them from more usual ARMD tasks. And we'll continue to talk about rapid teaming. The speed of technology change is rising exponentially, with the private sector often driving the rate of change, and highly functioning teams working at speed, optimized for innovation, and using new processes and methods are discriminators for innovation. Our job was to be the stranger, and we were certainly strange.
Now, all of our team had jobs doing other things besides just this one project. It wasn't like everybody could drop everything and focus on this. So in and around their real lives, we did this. This just gives you an idea of the kind of depth the field staff went through in order for us to be able to talk about things at the end of the project. Going from 0 to 100 miles an hour about what NASA was, what ARMD was, what the research centers were, what the individual team members in the AATC were about, and how they all functioned as a team was part of our charge. So 100 articles, a minimum of 100 articles were reviewed. 115 formal and informal interviews were done. A whole lot of video was watched, and I watched all the videos. Interviewees are 37 individuals. This pyramid of information allowed us to talk a great deal about what was going on in the field and how it was actually functioning. The site visits were carefully planned to take maximum advantage of the AATC members' time and to also interview and observe others at the home center. So it wasn't just that one person that we were following, it was their managers, it was other people around them. By focusing on multiple NASA centers, our methods and our analysis are part of the study of present-day dispersed but globally connected communities through multi-site ethnography. And this is important to remember because nobody had all of the information in their head. We all shared information. Elizabeth did a great job pulling tons of stuff together and spewing it back out to everybody so you could use that as actionable information to take the next step in the field work.
One of the things that's important, we showed you a very large team. This is why the very large team was important. We had somebody who did nothing but literature reviews. We had somebody who was the data manager as the field team poured data back to center. And that had to be managed. And as Neil said, it had to be digested, and then it had to be shared back out because we were constantly sharing information that then informed the next steps into the field, that created new questions that we were asking in the field. So Peter Van Arsdale was responsible for NASA Glenn, and he would bring back information and he would share that with the team, and that would then inform next steps. It was an intense project that we took on and that had to be done at NASA speed.
One of the things we had to be able to do was to explain our methods and our data to engineers. And this is where the language, the linguistic translation had to go on between our social science culture, the culture of anthropology as we practice, and the culture of engineering and what they value and how they value it. So we had to be very clear and very linear with how we presented information to people and why it was important and why it had meaning to them. At one point in one of the iterations of this paper or this report, there was a graphic that didn't have what do they call them, a scale. It was just to show change. And the engineers got all upset because there was no scale to this. We're like, no, this is just showing you we're going from here to there. Oh no, there's got to be a scale. So we took it out because it got too complicated to try to explain it to them. But it's those small things that started to tell us where we were connecting with them and where we had fallen off the face of the earth as far as their ability to follow what we were presenting to them.
So we're going to talk a little bit about the results and how different and countercultural the assignment was. So NASA simultaneously changed all of these conditions at once for this group of engineers. Importantly, all the work was conducted within a culture and organization that is optimized for what NASA and ARMD does best, and which is, like most cultures, resistant to change. Change threatens cultural and organizational integrity. And again, as I mentioned earlier, that created both difficulty for the team, but an opportunity to recognize where the fault lines were, where the cultural disconnects were between what the AATC team was doing and what NASA culture, ARMD culture, was needing to keep and move forward.
In that previous slide, some of those conditions, NASA was very clear about having changed. Other things they didn't understand that they had changed conditions until we pointed it out to them, and they were thinking, we shouldn't have probably done that. We should have had a more narrow focus on what we were doing, but by then it was too late because things had already gone on. All innovation is not created equal. And what we want to talk about for the next few minutes are different perspectives on innovation. because that is the key to both what the AATC did and the kinds of work that ARMD wants to add to its portfolio. We'll talk about ways in which it was rarefied and challenging and the opportunities that came from it.
So these pictures illustrate the difference between types of innovation. If you look to the top row, the wheelchair on the top left and the wheelchair in the center have a relationship. They bear almost no relationship to the Hitachi exoskeleton at the top right. The three pictures on the bottom create a similar picture. One asks, how can we improve the design? The other asks, what will change foundational conditions? The difference is that you can improve the design of a wheelchair, as opposed to how do you address mobility limitations? Very different questions. And I think the Hitachi exoskeleton is way past cool. Improvement versus imagining of how to address an issue in a whole new way is what the team was supposed to be doing. And remember, we talked earlier about engineering science and about NASA being a relatively conservative organization, risk averse. This is where crunch appears.
Finding innovation, Griffin has looked at primary innovation, which is creating a new product or process, and secondary, improving a product or process. We've used this definition as it clearly defines the boundary between incremental improvement as innovation and the blistering, lightning strike new kind of innovation defined as two different innovation processes. This was what NASA ARMD was trying to get to with the primary innovation. But all the thinking was based on secondary innovation experience. So making that shift and watching the engineers try to make that shift quickly was fascinating. It put them under all kinds of strain because they didn't know what it really meant. They were just tasked with doing this.
Here's a second definition, and this is Kaplan. Kaplan sought to quantify where organizations fall in innovation. Notice that only 10% are at the far right of the continuum. In most organizations, 90% will not be doing the far right kind of innovation. You can't just speed up what you're already doing. It's not a tweak of existing capabilities. The AATC team was working in the disruptive zone, only 10%. And they were trying to work in the 10% with tools and organizational culture of the 90%. And that's going to be a theme for the rest of the presentation. CAS the Convergent Aeronautics Systems wanted to push the boundaries and go into the 10%. They succeeded. The AATC team succeeded because NASA engineers would run through walls before failing. And they had a PI who was determined to get them across the finish line. It wasn't because they had all the tools. It wasn't because they grasped the thinking involved in primary innovation from the beginning. It is because they had will. And they were not going to fail. And the PI, who I pointed out in an earlier picture, was going to help them to get across the line. This is important. That said, there are clear lessons from the literature and their experience that are important to take away if this kind of primary innovation is desired. And we're going to talk about that a little bit.
Rapid design innovation, RDI, disruptive, transformative, exploratory, plus speed equals past that 10%. And we'll come back to the acronym because NASA loved acronyms. It's what the AATC undertook. It's this rapid disruptive design innovation. I want to stop for a moment. we've run through a presentation that started out talking about engineers in NASA. We've talked about teaming. We've talked about autonomy because that's sort of the central base of all of this. And we've talked about innovation. There is literature that goes on forever about almost all of this stuff. And our ethnographic team was tasked with trying to figure out what that meant in real time with real people as they were actually trying to make these changes in the way they thought and the way they functioned. So how countercultural was this to NASA ARMD? And the list of things in the chart are all the details, but 74% of what went on was countercultural or unusual. So the top one, creative and experiment and teaming. Unusual, NASA didn't do something like that. 22% had elements that could be common to either team under particular circumstances. So the project goals and objectives, experience new teaming environment. Yeah, you could do that. And you could say that was unusual. But only 4% were considered to be strictly normal for ARMD-C Research Center teams. That kind of gives you an idea of how far out these guys were put and what they were asked to do. Conceptually change the way they saw both their work, the content, but also how they worked with each other. And that is really challenging when you haven't gotten any guidelines and you're all engineers and your structure is pretty boxy and square. And all of a sudden they take away those structures and say, okay, now go out and create something.
So the team of intrepid engineers was given an important assignment that would take them into alien worlds. I'm sorry, I just like this. They were strangers in a strange land, working under clouds of questions and concern hovering over the team as they began their journey. And yet they succeeded. Sorry, you want to see that again? It just amused me, sorry.
Well, the NASA guys liked it too, especially the administrators.
We did that for the NASA guys.
So in this section, we'll talk about the results of our ethnographic work. We'll flip the switch and go back to our anthropology. Our 9-month contract became a 2-year process, which was just fascinating in and of itself. We didn't get any more money to do it, but there was a whole lot of work that went on after the actual research was completed to translate our findings of social science and anthropology into meaningful information for the engineers without losing track of the anthropology that was the base of all of this. We had to make sure that NASA understood this because they were the client. If we wanted to demonstrate the utility of anthropology, NASA had to understand why we brought information to them that you can't obtain any other way. So all this was securely grounded in data. We could show that to them in desired products and best practices. We made a number of presentations, including twice presenting at the Convergent Aeronautics Showcase, where ARMD highlights new research, presenting to CAS and ARMD leadership, and finally presenting to the largest aeronautics conference in the US. Again, the two-headed world that we lived in, trying to translate all of this into something meaningful to an audience that couldn't quite figure out what we were talking about to start with.
So the adaptations that were made by the team were fascinating, accepting that there was no specific technical expert on the team. This is central to the ARMD teams, that there is a specific technical expert, adjusting to a flat hierarchy, not having a PI who was leading and who was the center of the project universe. They were not autonomy leaders at NASA. These were everyday NASA engineers every day. These were the nozzle guys. These were the hose people. These were people who were not specific to autonomy, and that was done purposely. It was to see if you could move very quickly with a team of engineers brought in to address a priority problem and to rapidly innovate. And so none of them were autonomy leaders. Non-aerospace partners, non-traditional data, qualitative data. Oh my God, they were interviewing people. A real risk was not knowing how their work would be understood or valued within ARMD. there's no reward structure for any of this kind of work, or there wasn't when we finished up. And the non-traditional outcome was a process and organizational framework, not a product. One of the engineers, as they went to do their headquarters presentation, said, if we don't have an airplane, they're going to kill us. So over to Neil.
So the experiment was successful, probably more successful than they really understood when we finished. We were in the final briefing, and you could tell that the senior administrators were not happy with what had been presented. And Kathleen said, just take a moment here. We want to remind you about the experiment that you set up. And we're going, oh yeah, what? And we went through some of this, and Jaewon stopped and he said, you're right. We lost focus. We lost track of what we really set out to do. And our team is telling us we've been successful, that they can do, in fact, do this. And then he said, but without the ethnographic review, we wouldn't have known that. We would have killed our team because they didn't produce a wing. This is where our ethnographic work, our anthropology really comes to the front. We can explain things to people in ways that they would not have thought of and validate some of the things they wanted to accomplish. Kathleen keeps telling me I can't go off script, but I just did. So we can move on now.
There were three key differences that we determined were important for rapid innovation, rapid design innovation teams: the type of innovation, the type of team leadership, and the type of team form and functioning. We're going to talk about those three key differences a little bit between the teams focused on incremental improvement of processes or products and those attempting to work on primary innovation. The first is the type of innovation desired, the second is the type of theming, and the third is the type of leadership, which is absolutely critical. Now I'm going to put up an absolutely mind-numbing graphic that we created for the Convergent Aeronautics Showcase poster. We had an enormous poster, and this was one of the graphics. Because you can't do anything beyond a single poster board, we put everything into it. On the left, you see the general team form that is common within ARMD. Requirement-driven, long timeline, PI project initiated, multidisciplinary, reasonably low professional risk, and a clear reward structure. The teaming is generally a hub and spoke with the PI at the center, who very often recruits all of the members to do particular parts of the requirement. So if the PI decides they need an adaptive nozzle, they will look for the best adaptive nozzle person that they can find and bring that person in, give them the requirement, and they will go away and create that nozzle. We hypothesized the CAS type teaming in the center. We hypothesized that this was going to be the movement from general team form towards innovation, that it could be the hybrid. On the right is the rapid teaming approach. And as you can see, it's quite different from the other two. Problem-driven, PI may be a coach, tends to be interdisciplinary, truly interdisciplinary, very professionally risky because you're out on the edge creating something unknown, something new. And at that time, there was an unclear reward structure for RIP projects. Very rare at ARMD, common in innovation and design. Required adaptive leadership, required the team to be ambiguity tolerant, egalitarian, innovation type methods and work style, problem driven, rapid action. Look at the difference between the first and the third. And this was the gap.
we want to focus a little bit on team leadership, and it's not all created equal. At the bottom of that last chart, no, you can keep going, Kathleen.
Okay.
The graphic at the bottom left is kind of a traditional team management process. It's a team leader who brings information in from other resources, other people, has a vision and spews it back out with requests for people to do things and create new pieces. That central person does all the organizing and the review.
Why?
Leadership is followers following a leader going someplace to get to a goal. In the world that they were working in, that the AATC was working in, they didn't have a single leader. They were tasked with the idea of being a team structure that would optimize everybody's participation and allow for innovation to arise through that interactive group process, not engineering at all. And so there's no swim lanes, there's no requirements. And that was something the engineers kept saying to us, is it doesn't make any sense. Anybody's idea is as good as the next person's, and the PI's technical voice isn't any stronger than anybody else's. They support the team, the PI supports the team and moves the process along, and the development of product belongs to a team space. This is so contrary to NASA's culture that the engineering teams finally got their heads around this, but it took them a long time to give up the idea that somebody was really directing this. They kept asking the management system, what's the requirement? What are we supposed to? Just tell us and we'll do it. And management kept saying, we don't have anything to tell you. Heifetz has said adaptive leadership is a practice, not a theory, defining it as, quote, the practice of mobilizing people to tackle tough challenges and thrive. This is what NASA set out for ARMD to do.
And while resistance may be futile, adaptive leadership also means that you will be dealing with loss, because it is a new way of tackling issues people will resist. And all team functioning is not created equal. We've said this, we've shown it, we're going to talk about it just a little bit more before we tell you the outcome. We showed you these statistics earlier. There are a variety of specific conditions in the AAT experiments which are likely to be encountered by other RDI teams that were either included as a part of the project design or were encountered as it unfolded. This was not a fully specified project. It was a naturalistic experiment that went on. So the characteristics that we determined were both through the literature and through our ethnography that were important for RDI, as you will see in the boxes. The first several characteristics are focused on the formation and functioning of the team itself. The importance of an egalitarian structure among peers has been highlighted, as well as the central nature of the team relationships. Interdependency of work tasks ensures that the best of the team resources are drawn upon for the work. No one works without significant and frequent correspondence to other team members. Again, contrast this with what we've talked about of the NASA ARMD normal. Development of good relationships among team members, grounded in cooperation and marked by respect, is an essential element. Resolution of conflict and adaptive work styles are the next characteristics. In the literature, it was emphasized that innovation teams require both autonomy and sheltered space. This goes back to Skunk Works at IBM. You needed sheltered space, and there have been a lot of experiments with what you do with innovation teams. Do you bring them inside? Do you keep them outside? If you bring them inside, can you keep them safe from the culture which will squeeze them? They also need flexible, focused, and adaptive leadership. And as noted in the literature, team conflict is normal, has to be recognized, addressed, in order to resolve the potentiating issues and to ensure that conflict doesn't fester. The team must be trained and supported in adapting to changing circumstances, which are the hallmark of innovation. And the final two characteristics are grounded in the organization, having well-integrated structures and policies that support the team and which ensure their ability to function with the fewest distractions possible is essential. Finally, ensuring that there is broad understanding and support for the importance of innovation and that the teams that undertake RIP tasks across organizational levels and networks helps to lay organizational groundwork for valuing and participating in these kinds of tasks. If you don't sanction and reward, it won't happen. People will not put up their hands because it's too risky.
So we've discussed three differentiating factors between normal teams and those prepared to work in the 10% or beyond. In the next section, we want to discuss the implications of the findings of this research for both NASA and for other organizations. Quickly, we'll talk about this quickly. You've seen this graphic before. All of these live within the aeronautics culture at the centers. If the arrows represent three of the strategies that ARMD and the research centers will begin to focus on to enable rapid design innovation, then the organizational cultures those strategies live within must be adapted to support these or other strategies haven't got a chance of survival.
Processes must change. You can't just try to squeeze CAS and its teams into an existing mold. You can't just speed up existing processes. I said several times rewards have to change and new ones created. They have to be able to live in parallel to standard teams and have parallel rewards. High quality and targeted training has to be added for researchers and for managers. New behaviors, new teaming, new leadership has to be coached and modeled, and all must be proactively protected. And leadership has to be active, verbal. It can't be occasional and it can't be half-hearted. This is a hard set of requirements for a highly functioning, globally known organization to take up and to create something that they want, but is countercultural.
So as Kathleen was saying, training, coaching, modeling, support, rewards all need to be there, and they need to be modified in order to meet this new requirement. Not all of ARMD needs to move to this perspective, but it needs to allow for it and value it. It needs to share that perspective with its staff, with the other engineers. It needs to enculturate new young engineers coming into this system to understand why it's important to value this. So to succeed, you have to build it, you have to train for it, you have to practice it, you have to model it, and you have to reward it. And Anna Marie McGovern is a leader who is doing that now within NASA ARMD. She understood what these things meant, and she started to practice them almost immediately.
So we all know about culture. It doesn't change easily. It doesn't want to change. There's a reason it exists. And you can't change a cat either, evidently. Everything we've talked about, we discussed with the NASA teams, we discussed with NASA leadership. These things need to be done continually and persistently. And we said resistance is going to come from all corners of the culture. Sometimes you're going to see it coming, and sometimes it's going to surprise you. You're going to have to be proactive, and leaders are going to have to lean in and learn to live in that ambiguous space between the old culture and what you want to model and form. And you're going to have to be culture bidextrous in order to do this. there's going to have to be proactive sanctioning and with rigor, because if you lose rigor, you lose your organization. Cultures defend themselves. That's the normative state. We're almost done. 2 more slides.
So what did the ethnography contribute? I particularly like this because Anna Maria said this and none of us had a way of contributing to it. It's very profound. LTG's analysis has been extremely useful in multiple ways. It should be the LTG team's analysis. First, the breadth of their analysis has highlighted numerous interdependent aspects influencing our work to improve our innovation strategies. Second, their work provided something every engineer craves, data. Third, the clarity of the work established a vocabulary for describing concepts that were previously insufficiently clear. Fourth, LTG suggested approaches to mitigate some of the challenges. These are all the necessary antecedents for effective organizational change and have been very useful in that regard. Something that we didn't speak about is where CAS sits in the pantheon of aeronautics. At ARMD, CAS is the tip of the spear of innovation. This project was the very point of all of that, trying to see if NASA ARMD could innovate within the systems it's got, with the engineers it has, and produce a process, not a product, a process that could be molded into other ARMD activities.
So 3 more points that Anna Maria made, that the work helped provide substantive guidance for decision-making that impacted several projects. Having extensive data upon which to stand, clear vocabulary to describe the needed actions, and constructive recommendations to guide decisions has been invaluable. And finally, this makes me verklempt. The analysis has provided NASA with important needed tools to help propel aeronautic innovations for years to come, enabling us to continue advancements and improvements within aerospace and beyond. Holy cow. So we've tried to tell 3 complicated stories all at once, and to show their intertwining, and it was almost NASA hard. We were very pleased to be able to contribute to the work of CAS, ARMD, and NASA, and all of us were challenged, stimulated, and excited by the work and the outcomes. Couldn't resist.
So before we go on, I said at the beginning of this, there are concepts, ideas, and things that I wanted to bring back up that exist in our daily activities, our daily lives, that were kind of ideas back then. Some of them weren't even ideas. Design thinking, it's become all the rage in anthropology. User experience research, we all have an idea of what that means. Back then, IDEO was just getting this off the ground with other user experience research organizations. 3D printing. When we were at the CAS showcase, one of the things was a 3D printer. This was a huge machine and was making this little bolt. And now we're printing all kinds of stuff 3D. Drones. When we were there, they told us all the reasons drones weren't going to work. They would not have a place in day-to-day activities. And they're everywhere now. When you can think about having your meals delivered by drone, it sort of makes me kind of worried. Driverless vehicles, autonomous vehicles, not planes, but flyable cars. I saw an ad for a motorcycle, flyable motorcycle the other day. I'm like, wow, this is really crazy. All of these things were ideas these engineers were kicking around back then. Think about where we're going to be in 5 years from now. What kinds of exciting things will happen? And anthropology, this team of anthropologists, were able to capture that excitement, that innovation, and talk about the processes in grounded methods with real data to convince engineers we know what we're talking about.
Okay, we are open for discussion and questions, and I want to recognize Judith Friedenberg's question in the chat, which is, I think the topic for a dissertation, but I'm not sure. Hi, Judith. I would like to take you back to NASA's request for proposals. Why did they ask for help to change? Who made the decision? Why did they think it was not working as expected?
I guess
Anna Maria, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I guess what I was trying to get at, because you didn't get into that. You just said you proposed and then won the contract. But I kept thinking where they were when they were asking for you to come in is sort of gives you a sense of the base culture, who they were before you came in.
Probably starting with the person. Anna Maria McGowan was the CAS innovator, the Convergent Aeronautics Systems designer and innovator. And when CAS decided that they wanted to conduct an experiment with current NASA engineers on design innovation, she believed that they needed fresh eyes, somebody outside of the organization that could observe, understand it in context, but also diagnose where resistance came from and where there were facilitators that helped to move beyond the resistance. And so it was Anna Maria, I think, who sold this to ARMD leadership, as she was then CAS leader. Elizabeth or Peter, anything you want to add? I think Elizabeth is looking to unmute, so I'm going to just pause.
Thank you, Kathleen. No, I think you've said it very well. I think they don't normally work the way that you described, and my recollection is that they kind of wanted to see if they could pull it off.
Yeah. I like Tanya's, it's like asking horses to be unicorns, right? I put the link to the AIAA paper that we wrote in the chat. It's freely available if you're interested. It's only 10 pages. It won't take you an hour and 15 minutes to read. Suzanne has her hand up.
It's still not clear to me if in the statement of work and what you were asked to do, to what extent did they say what they wanted the experiment to be? How much of that was predefined? How much was worked out as you went? I guess I'm thinking old ways, looking for what was there and then what happened. But tell me how it happened, please. If that makes sense.
It was a bit of a naturalistic experiment to bring ethnographers into the middle of this. The requirements were a little open.
A little?
And we worked hard to create methodology by which we could, and remember that we started 6 months after the team did, by which we could begin to catch up with the team, understand where they were within their home environment and within the AATC team and within NASA culture writ large. We created this with the support of Anna Maria, who was our continuous translator and in some cases advancer. When people said, I'm going to talk with who about what, when they were told that ethnographers were coming, Anna Maria was there to say, this is important, you need to do this. when center leadership said, who am I talking with again? Anna Maria was able to provide the groundwork on which they understood why this was important. So it was a bit of a naturalistic experiment, and the ethnographic team was absolutely brilliant about making it work. Just as the AATC team made it work, this team made it work.
I really
It's also, I
appreciate you
think,
profiling her so much because I think it's so important, the idea of a cross-pollinator, right? Someone who is doing that intermediary, and the fact that she has those engineering credentials, but she has also that creative, ethnographic, emotional labor, soft skill set as well. I think those people are absolutely pivotal to organizations, and they really make things work. I can identify exactly who that is where I work, and people think like he's nuts, right? But he has those skills, right, in R&D and the food science background and all that. But he also has that real out there thinking. That idea of out of the box thinking is not something that is natural to very many people. And so I think it's great that the way that y'all profiled her. And I wonder too, like I was looking at her cultural background, how much too that also influences her ability to think in multiple contexts. So great stuff.
Oh, she moves back and forth at high speed. And Neil was talking about the time after our data collection part, and was describing what we did during that time. And part of it was a master class in understanding what NASA was going to need to see and understand in order to get the outcomes of the ethnography and be able to take them up and use them. We did major mind melding with Anna Maria over this. We experimented with presentations, and she'd say, "No, they'll never get that slide, throw it out." And it was a real partnership that I think we all value a lot. We did a presentation to a federal group last week, and I was leading the team that was doing it. And we're used to, all of us, I think, are used to doing problem, methods, results, and meaning as the form in which we provide information to presenting our results. And Anna Maria would say to me, "Kathleen, bottom line up front, tell them what you learned, give it to them up front." So last week when we were preparing this presentation, I said that to our team. We're going to give them the bottom line up front. We'll put the methods in the appendix. If they're interested, we'll talk about that. But they've been there. They understand much of what we're doing. I don't think we need to. It's also part of a little defensive-ness that we have, I think, is that we have to justify where we come out through this process. And she said, "You don't have to justify anything. Tell us what you learned. Give us the bottom line. We'll ask questions if we have them, but give us the bottom line." So she was a great mentor to us all, extraordinarily exacting, challenging, delightful. There are all kinds of adjectives that could be applied. Scary smart, just scary smart.
One of the really great things about this project in working with the anthropologists, understanding that we all share a common base of knowledge, common training, and a common application of what we do, so that we could shortcut some of the things that you'd have to explain to a sociologist or a psychologist or an engineer and move on and be really comfortable that what you're doing is based on a consistent application of theory and methods across all of the participants working on the project. We've run into this several times now with anthropologists where, regardless of where you've been trained, As long as you've got that core anthropological training, you have a consistent basis to talk with the rest of the world about anthropology. And that's very reassuring. Kathleen was talking about bottom line up front. We had a WHO project officer who kept saying that to us over and over again. Tell me what I need to know, and then we'll figure it out. But just tell me, don't give me all the methods. Don't give me all that. And I think these are really important ideas for anthropologists, that we need to get that message up front and get it out there before it gets lost in the noise of all how we did it and why it was important.
That project officer is in the audience tonight, by the way. That's Ted Karff. And thank you, Ted, for coming. And thank you for disciplining us. Brian just told me that he hit a paywall with the article. We will, I'm sorry about that. You shouldn't have hit a paywall. You should be able to read it right on the landing page, and we will get you a paywall-free copy of the article, and it will be available when WAPA puts the recording up. Sorry. Other questions, other thoughts?
I just wanted to mention, I would put this here in the chat about the love about vocabulary. I think when people are pushed into a new way of thinking, they have no words. They don't know how to describe something. And once they get a nomenclature and a vocabulary to get going and give them some footing, then people start to like, okay, I can imbibe this a little bit. They're not drinking from the fire hydrant. And so I think it's really important. And I think, for engineers or anybody that's more hard science related, that idea of giving them some structure, something to create with. So I thought that was a great comment that Ana Maria had said about the vocabulary.
Yeah. And we had to learn the vocabulary very quickly. They were not going to be patient with us not having at least the basic language because they were moving very quickly. And if we trailed, it was, oh, well. Too bad for the anthropologists. Priscilla asks a really interesting question. On what I'd call a granular level, how did anthropological skills help achieve rapport among engineers? Anybody on the team want to take that one? Elizabeth.
Yeah, I'll take that one. I've spent my entire professional life with engineers, and so I love them, and I think they get to love me. So I felt so at home being at NASA. Seriously, I have worked with engineers, mostly automotive engineers, but once you meet one, you just, I don't know, there's just something about how they work. They're just so straightforward as a rule. And I often found myself anticipating what they would do or how they would react. And I had to stop myself, because here we are collecting data and say, no, you can't do that. But I felt extremely comfortable. I don't know if that was the experience of the other team members so much, but it was mine.
Peter, are you still there?
No, he had to run off. He sent me a message.
Okay, because Peter was on the ground at Glenn, and Peter is a major NASA geek and was totally over the moon with being on this project. I want to actually call somebody out here who works a lot in innovation. Daria. Yeah, I'm calling you out. Hi. Questions or thoughts? Daria lives at the interface of anthropology and engineering and design work, and has done some fascinating work over the years. Thoughts on the NASA experience?
Oh my gosh, this is one of my favorite case studies. I mean, we've been talking about this for such a long time. because you didn't say this, but Kathleen and Neil have been my mentors for, I think we calculated 15 years. So we've been, as I've gotten older, we've been mutually supporting each other. And I thought this was fascinating. I recently came back from a trip to NASA Langley. So I work at Carnegie Mellon University in an artificial intelligence laboratory, and I lead strategy and policy, which means I'm constantly at that intersection of trying to extrapolate value up and out of the engineering team's tactical efforts and into impact statements and ways to leverage what we're learning technically into important changes for public policy and regulation as well. That's just another component. And I think what you did with NASA was really great. You did a lot of cross-pollinating of terms. You explained and over-explained your roles and what you were doing. Where necessary, you used quantifiable terms, which I love. It's very special that you had a champion that helped you navigate this space and really provided what we call in government top cover.
Yes.
I think this work will become increasingly necessary. Again, I work at these intersections of AI and autonomy. Even working with the NASA teams we're working with right now, something that keeps coming forward is that the more we automate, the more questions come to the humans who are in the loop. And learning where these breakdowns are and the ability to think critically about the problems we're trying to solve and our approach, and then the impact of that work will continue to be vitally important even as these technologies come online. So I'm kind of jumping all over the place, but the value and role of translation work is definitely not going away. In fact, I think it's becoming more valuable because there's a much larger spread between the speed and technical parts of the technologies that we're talking about and the folks who need to know how they work and understand what the implications are for that rapid innovation. So I'll leave it there for now.
That was great off the cuff. That's amazing. Jennifer.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Good evening. That actually that's kind of a follow-up to my question. It's your point, Daria, that you just mentioned. And I was wondering if this was so countercultural, so innovative, the skill sets that they learned, and it was an experiment. So the skill sets that team learned, then sort of the question is how are they integrating that back into NASA to propel themselves forward a little bit more? So I'm now you have maybe you've learned more, you have the experience of a few years since the conclusion of the project. Do you know if there's been some additional integration or some additional results since that work?
Yes, actually, we do. These are slides we didn't show because they're boring tables. Shared leadership was identified in the ethnography, and it was sanctioned by CAS project leaders. They brought on 2 graduate interns majoring in industrial and organizational psychology to develop supporting materials for internal use and application. The training that we suggested was put into place. There was an all-hands meeting for the CAS leadership team and the 4 NASA centers. Shared leadership is now an accepted and supported practice within the CAS project, and experience with that approach is continuing to spread. The Director of Engineering at NASA Langley requested that strategic leadership materials be created and hosted interactive discussions with Directorate Office executive and senior leaders. They lead over 350 engineers. The results of the ethnography have helped to guide the development of RIP teams within CASA. They now have a postdoctoral fellow who was, I love this, was assigned the task of rigorous analysis of the full final report and how it connects to other organizational analyses. And they're working on that. The use of qualitative tools was not really a part of the ARMD culture. And the use of qualitative tools is now accepted as part of the CAS-based research across the 4 ARMD research centers. This is not ARMD-wide, this is CAS, which is a subsector of ARMD. A degree of comfort with ethnography was achieved, and it's now an understood and accepted concept, opening the door to other ethnographers. There is a new vocabulary that was introduced as part of the final report and it is being used. And there is a new Learning and Innovation Research Activities, LIRA, effort within CAS that refers to the final report and is using it to move new efforts. So there is much that's going on going forward. We were a contributor to this. This isn't all our work. And, humility in anthropology is really an important thing. We were a contributor. Anna Maria created the experiment. She created us. And then used these to inform one another. And now she is leading the LIRA effort. And this is a very high profile effort. We're going to run out of time.
This is also one of those times when anthropology is front and center in a process evaluation, not of a thing. We're good at building roads and building dams, doing those kinds of infrastructure projects. We're good at bringing people to tables and having them talk about things, but looking at innovation puts anthropology in a very different world than most of what the rest of what we do. And having NASA ARMD pick this up for CAS, which is their innovative headlight, and saying this is what we need to be able to do to move forward, should give anthropology a role at NASA that we couldn't have imagined 6 or 8 years ago. And this is really cool stuff. And I am so pleased that this team that we pulled together could do this work at speed and share the outcomes with each other so that NASA benefited from the whole thing. This is the way life's supposed to work, I think.
Daria posted a note. One other benefit to this work, somewhat indirectly, is the ability to prime teams to be more open to the types of questions and challenges that come with Track 2 innovation. We call this an insurgency of critical thinkers in my past life, but the act of participating in a project research study like this actually changes the folks involved. This has been my experience as I seek to bring engineering participants up and out of their typical comfort zones and along with me for the journey of sense making. I want to tell a very quick story before we turn into pumpkins. At the last briefing that we did with the AATC team, one of the engineers we'd become friendly with over time sidled up to me at the end and we were talking, and he was talking about what he had been doing on the project. And we said, well, this is probably our last briefing. He said, I have a question for you. And I said, okay. He said, do you have a spirit animal? I said, I laughed and I said, if I did, would I tell you? Which is to say, over time, yes, they became much more comfortable with us, comfortable enough to joke about spirit animals and anthropologists. CAS is focused on bringing anthropologists into ARMD. And if Anna Maria is focused on this, it will happen. And having engineers and anthropologists bumping along together will make a difference in the ability of anthropologists to share perspectives with engineers, which I think will be useful for everybody. And Sarah Strauss, wow. As an anthropologist who teaches at a small and highly innovative tech school, I appreciate seeing the other end of engineering world. The one required course that our students take is qualitative methods prep for their required junior year at one of our 50 global project centers, where they conduct research and present findings to support tech society problems driven by local sponsors. We hope that in our graduate engineers will, in fact, bring to their new workplaces the teaming skills, ability to communicate with each other and with the rest of the world, and leadership, conflict management, adaptability, and the value of attending to cultural context. Thank you, Sarah. Cool. So I'm really delighted to see these insights made to the top of the engineering world.
We've been doing this at WPI since the early 70s. Really, they dumped the entire engineering curriculum on its head in 1970 and have been fighting with accreditation folks in engineering ever since to be able to maintain the kind of curriculum that we have while still turning out accredited engineers who notoriously do not get to stray from the book or the path. And so to have the single course that they all take be qualitative methods, way too much fun for me, coming from having taught ethnographic methods to anthro majors for 24 years before that. They have to learn how to talk to each other. Teaming skills are absolutely through the entire curriculum is project-based learning, and they have to learn how to listen to each other, to find each other's strengths and use those to create collaboratively, effective collaborative teams. And so very, very cool to see this from the other end of NASA recognizing this. And we've heard it from other people, from companies that tell me, friends at other companies that say they like hiring WPI students because they can talk to each other and they can talk to others, and they know how to play nicely with the other children. And that is not a typical trait of students who emerge from an engineering program, unless they've had some other kind of experience to get them off of the straight and narrow of the books. And so it's been really quite enlightening and interesting to have them see that it matters to talk to people and to each other, for that matter. Yeah. So lots of fun. And yes, Neil, absolutely. I was trying to think when we can get you out here to talk, for sure. For sure. Anyway, thank you. Lots of fun.
Well, and just in case anybody thought we were talking out of school, we were blessed to present on this by NASA. And you'll see in the paper when you get it that a lot of this was said in very short form. So thank you all. We appreciate you having us here.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Elizabeth. And who else am I missing? That's
Peter.
Peter's gone. But anyway, this is amazingly wonderful and enlightening and stretched my brain.
Oh, it stretched all of our brains.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.